to this resolution is that there's a couple of areas that I disagree with. And I'm going to reference an election commission case that we had recently in which the election commission attempted to remove a legislature. The end result of that case was that the court held that they don't have the power to do that because the Constitution does not give them the power to do it. They looked at other ways to try to get around that, but ultimately the court held that the Constitution's clear. We have removal and recall. In this instance, our Constitution has an election challenge clause in the Constitution. It does not state that the legislature has authority to override an election. If someone's unhappy with the election commission's final determination, their recourse is to take it to the court. You can take it directly to the Supreme Court. That's in the Constitution. When it comes to the special prosecutor part that the legislatures are wanting to call, we have several cases going back to Mr. Flying Man's administration, specifically the special prosecutor case, which Mr. Spotted Wolf was a party to. In that particular case, they had several holdings that apply to this situation here, which clearly limits the legislature's authority to act. And I'm just going to read this word for word. Article 6, Section 7A Voidness Clause. Extraordinarily strong medicine against extra-constitutional adventurism by the legislature. It is the period at the end of Article 6's text. The legislature powers come almost entirely from Article 6. Within Article 6, there is no power by the legislature to call for a special election to override an entire election. It's pretty clear from the reading of the text of the Constitution that special election only applies to certain areas. In the instance of a recall or a removal or a referendum vote, not in this situation. In that same case, the Supreme Court held Article 6 creates not a legislating and executive business committee, but a legislature with the power to adopt only laws and resolutions and only through the Article 6, Section 7A legislative process. Anything else that the legislature may do can have no effect outside the four walls of the legislative branch. And every tribal council or employee is bound by Article 6, Section 7A to simply ignore any such attempted action. In that same case, they talk about the rationale that the legislatures presented in defending their position to hire a special prosecutor. In that case, the Supreme Court held that the legislature cannot take it upon themselves to determine when and why to hire a special prosecutor or why one should be hired, that authority falls within the executive branch of the governor under their attorney general. If you look at all that case law, and you combine it in with the Constitution, it's pretty clear that the legislature does not have the authority to call a special election to override an entire election or to direct the governor to hire a special prosecutor. That is his discretion at his sole mandate, and it's Supreme Court case law that backs these statements. Thank you.